Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTK-DB. Let's talk. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and we are connecting you to what's next in your life. And we're here to remind you that you are important to this world, and we sure are glad to have you along on this episode of the New Bridge Radio Show. Remember, you can always catch the show live on our station website. All you need to do is go to www.wltkdb.com and you'll be able to view the show live, and you'll be able to join the station chat, and you'll be able to ask questions of our guests and meet like-minded people like yourself. It'll be fun for you. Also, if you would like to get in touch with the New Bridge Radio Show, you can email us. Our email address is thenewbridgeradioshow@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. We love to know what you like about the show. And we also love to know if you'd like to be our guest. We love talking to people who connected to whatever was next in their life. It always helps other people. And if you have an interesting story of how you connected to what was next, feel free to drop us a line and we'll have you on our radio show. Tonight, we are privileged to speak to one of the most unique health and wellness coaches we have ever had on the New Bridge Radio Show. Our guest is Lisa Dahl. She is an intuitive eating health coach. And the second I said that she's an intuitive eating health coach, some of you may have said, wait a minute, that just may be what I need. And you will not regret tuning in tonight, because Lisa is also a workshop facilitator and a meal planning expert. And I am very pleased to have her on the show tonight because she is going to answer some very interesting questions about food. Welcome, Lisa. Welcome, Lisa. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. And you know, there's a little bit of synchronicity to your visit. And I myself am a food person. And when you reached out to the New Bridge Radio Show, I saw your picture on your website, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you look exactly like one of my students, a student I had at Le Cordon Bleu, one of my classmates. And her name was Leslie. And believe it or not, she actually went into catering, Lisa. But Leslie was just one of those people that just had such a great attitude. Like, she was one of those chefs that's like, I'll do anything. You want 500 turkeys? You got it.
Magic.
Yes. And when I saw your picture, I'm like, oh, she reminds me so much of my classmate. So when I saw your request, I'm like, instantly, yes. I'll definitely have you on the show.
Awesome. I'm glad some things clicked.
Yes, absolutely. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about food and about the way we think about food. But let me ask you this question, because I'm curious, Lisa. What was your relationship with food growing up? Like, were your parents good cooks? Were you enamored with food?
Food has always been a love of mine. I think I started probably cooking and baking when I was 7 or 8. And I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I remember, I think one of my first cakes that I made where, my parents are amazing. And I know that I left out an ingredient because it just didn't come out the way it was supposed to look. And they ate it, and they just raved at how wonderful it was. And I was looking at it, I'm thinking, this is just a disaster. But I actually got my love of baking from my grandmother. And she was an incredible baker, a very traditional cook, but a really wonderful baker. And when I was coming home from college, and she was probably in her late 80s, and she had this big, huge, that orange flame Le Creuset pot, the biggest one that they make. And she used to make chicken soup and all of her, big meals in that. But it had been tucked underneath her cabinet for years. Like, I hadn't seen it in the longest time. And she said, if you can take it out, it's yours. I mean, I was 20. I, bent down, picked it up, took it out, and out the door I went, but she
Oh,
couldn't carry it anymore.
oh, wow.
So it was one of the, food has always been a part of my life, but it's been a love-hate relationship because I have been dieting since I'm 12 years old,
Mm,
or
mhm,
had been. And as much as I loved to cook and bake, it was always with everyone else can enjoy. And I was always very tempered on how much I could enjoy.
mhm. I love that you said that because a lot of us turn to food because we have these wonderful memories of grandparents and holidays and we have all these memories that are just infused with food. And so it can sometimes lead to us having an attachment and a coping way of looking at food.
Absolutely. And we all have different relationships with foods, and we all eat emotionally,
Mhm,
whether we are eating for because we're stressed, whether it's anxiety, whether we're celebrating, whether it's joy, whether it is a memory of a holiday. There's an emotion behind everything. Every time we eat, there's some sort of emotion that is taking place within our bodies.
mhm,
And sometimes when we think about food as a memory and then have it, fast forward 15 years, 20 years later, sometimes it's the memory that tastes so much better than
right,
the actual food. And then
right.
sometimes it's like, "Oh my god, it's as wonderful as I remember it being." You just when you're present with the food, when you're really focusing on the food and the taste and the texture and the flavor and eating it mindfully, it's a very different experience often than what you remember being caught up in the emotion of what you thought, of how you felt when you ate it the first time 20 years
Mhm,
ago or however long it is.
mhm. So, your food journey, eventually led you to opening a very successful catering company, and I really love the name. The name of your catering company is clever. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the name of my catering company was Simply Delicious Custom Catering and Confections,
Mhm,
and it was, the name came from, my ex-husband's last name was Dahl, so my name was Dahl, and we had a friend of ours who was very clever into marketing, and we had been sitting around for a couple of days throwing names around and couldn't come up with anything, and a few days later, all of a sudden, he sends me a message, an email, because it was before, like, the texting thing was real popular, and he's like, "Simply Delicious," and that was it. So
mm,
I became known as Simply Delicious, and it was quite the transition when I left the catering field because everyone knew me as Simply Delicious, and it was kind
mhm.
of like a loss of identity when I shifted careers into health coaching. So it's kind of different because I'm not known in the health coaching field as Simply Delicious.
Yes. Well, catering is really, really tough work, and I have a question for you, about it. Being someone that's been a kitchen person as well and worked in many kitchens, there is something that happens, mostly in a restaurant though, but there's something that happens in the food world that kind of I feel is spiritual in a way, and there can and it's an interesting feeling you have when you're working with a lot of people and you're putting food together and you live and die by the clock and you're trying to get food out. There's something that can happen where all of a sudden everything just clicks, everything just moves and everything is in the right order, and the time just flies by so quickly. Did you experience that yourself?
It's funny that you say that. And, when you're cooking for lots of people and time is of the essence and you plan it and like I always schedule like this is what I'm doing at this time and this is what I'm doing at that time. And it I'm gonna say it always worked. And people would be like, "Well, how do you do it?" And to be honest, it's just something that came naturally. Like, it's
Mhm,
just something that I was always able to do, even from my very first event when, planning for when things go wrong or you forget things because that happens. And somehow it is just a natural thing that I am able to do, is to be able to just time it, get it right. And I hadn't thought about it in a long time. And it's like you watch the cooking shows and you're like, how do they do that? And I'm like, wait a second, I used to be able to do
Yes.
that. Right.
There is something amazing that happens when it kind of started a spiritual journey for myself, is being around other chefs and cooking, because there was something to it that was very inspirational when people just started being like-minded. And so I so it kind of, makes sense that when you left that world and transitioned into something else, I can understand how you would kind of miss that feeling. Because because I tended to want to do everything the way I cooked. Okay, I'm going to do this and do this and that. Did you find that yourself?
Oh, absolutely. And what's funny is that because I'm so consumed and love, love, love what I do now, that sometimes there's the pull that I don't get to cook and do as much as I used to do. And it's my partner's birthday tomorrow, and I purposely left the day blank with client calls, and I have a whole day of cooking ahead of me tomorrow. And I'm so excited, and I'm making things that I don't typically make. And I was just like, you know what? It's a reason to just indulge and engage in all the things that I haven't had a chance to do in a long time. So I'm actually looking forward to a cooking day tomorrow.
Yes. Which is why I kind of feel like there are a lot of health coaches out there that do wonderful, wonderful work. But there is something about people who have this experience in cooking the way, cooking for a lot of people, that have a special understanding of not only, what needs to be done, but how to chunk things down. And I think that's kind of what makes really good coaching. Do you find that true in your experience? Do you find that, oh my gosh, look at how did you find yourself really good at it?
I mean, I love talking about meal planning with my
Hmm.
clients and taking away the rigidity of what we as a society have turned meal planning into. Like,
Hmm.
people think meal planning and they think oh, like how can I take this on? You're talking, 21 meals and snacks and kids, and what do you do with it all? And the approach that I take several approaches depending on who I'm working with and where they're at, because people are
Hmm.
at so many different stages and have different levels of resistance. And it's really about just starting small. If you don't cook, let's just get one meal, or one, learning how to get the components, that it doesn't have to be a recipe. It
Hmm.
could be as simple as saying, let's learn how to make some chicken. Let's learn how to get some proteins together. Let's learn how to get some, potatoes or healthy carbohydrates. How do we mix and match? And I created something called menu mapping, so
Hmm.
that if you are making this dish, and let's just say that there are scallions and garlic and chicken in that recipe,
Hmm.
how can we use that recipe with those components into the next thing, so that everything that you make can be repurposed, reused? There's some component that can be taken from that original piece and move it forward. So you kind of create an infographic type thing. And,
Hmm.
here's your core. I don't know if nobody can see, but you have your core recipe, and then there's spiders from all around, all the different things that you can make from there. So
Right.
we start out really simple. But I always try to help people to understand that the best meal planning is, you don't have to cook it from scratch. It's just knowing what your plan is. You can have soups in the freezer and pull it out. That's a meal plan. You know that you're going to do takeout on Tuesday. That's a meal plan. You want to cook at home? Let's figure out what small thing you can do. Do you need to buy things chopped or pre-cut? Let's do it. There's no stigma. There's no shame. The goal is to get food on the table and to be able to enjoy it with your family or by
Hmm.
yourself.
Mhm. So, as someone who had this relationship with food, and you mentioned that you had been someone who uh, had been on a dieting track. Um, what changed in your experience and enlightened you about food to make you make better choices?
So my dieting history, as I mentioned briefly, started at 12, and I was the typical yo-yo dieter, on a diet, off a diet, good food, good day, bad day. And just from some personal reasons, I needed to shift careers, and um, I left the catering business and decided I'd be a health coach. And I thought, like, I'm already an expert dieter. And as a woman, the most important thing in my mind at that time was, I can help women lose weight.
Right.
And when I started working with my clients, it was not only stressful on the days that I was weighing myself, all of a sudden I was feeling the stress from my clients on, quote unquote, share your progress day. And they were making great strides and doing wonderful things. And all of a sudden they're defeated and deflated because of a number on the scale. And just because of my desire to continue to learn and see what else is out there, I came across a community called Health at Every Size. And that started to shift my relationship with food, because I didn't know that I had my own disordered eating challenges, because it was normal in my world. I didn't know that people didn't do what I did.
Mhm.
And through there, I discovered the practice of intuitive eating. And it really helped me to ditch the diet and to change my relationship with food. And it's just been an amazing transformation for me personally and professionally, on getting out of that diet culture world and really helping women also understand the harm that happens within that community and in our society.
Exactly. So, I when you started to use your intuition, were you letting it guide you as far as what to make, or maybe just a little bit? What was it? What was your intuition telling you in the beginning that seemed to make sense, and all of a sudden you're like,
Well, it was, I mean, I had, like, eating quote unquote healthy has been something that I have done for years. It was just the question of rigidity.
Mhm.
And that's really what shifted, is that all of the rules dissipate. When you start to eat and cook with your intuition, you're really following what your body needs and wants, and understanding the relationship with why you're choosing things. And, is it the food that's really going to soothe and take care of whatever it is that challenge? Or do you need to kind of dig a little bit deeper and say, you know what, I'm experiencing this. Maybe I need to do something else. How do we
Mhm.
build that self-care toolbox out besides the food, so that when you start to listen to what's happening, it's not such an automatic pilot of, when I'm stressed, I'm going to go eat the Oreos, or when I'm unhappy, I'm going to do this, or eat until you're, beyond stuffed because it makes you feel good in the moment. So it really takes away the rules of, when you're dieting, you eat this, and this at this time of day, and you have to have this combination of foods. And there's all those rules. Intuitive eating, all those rules are out the door. The only quote unquote rule that you have is to view yourself and your experiences with curiosity versus judgment.
Oh, I like that. Curiosity instead of judgment. So let me tell you this. Let me ask you this. Have you, eating more intuitively, are there times where your body might say, I don't think I need to eat. I feel fine.
Absolutely. I
Mhm.
was working with some clients this morning. With a client, I have a group community, and one of the clients that I work with was sharing that she typically, previously, eats at, 8 o'clock, noon. And, sometimes at 9 o'clock, or 10 o'clock, she's like, well, I'm starting to feel hungry. And then she kind of starts to pick, but she's not allowed to have lunch, allowed, quote unquote, to have lunch until noon. And she shared today, she said, I was hungry at 10 o'clock and I ate something instead of picking. And it satisfied me. And I felt so much better. And then a few hours later, I was able to eat again, that I didn't have to wait until 5 or 6 o'clock when I was allowed, quote unquote, to eat dinner.
Mhm.
So it's a very different experience, because as dieters, typically, they'll say, well, if I eat in the morning, that means I'm going to have to eat all day and I'm going to be hungry all day. And it's easier to skip this and it's easier to skip that. And they shut down what their body cues are really telling them.
Mhm.
So it's really learning to listen to what are your signals. I mean, some of my clients, they have this standard typical tummy rumbling, but others will notice that they lose their ability to focus, or they can't concentrate, or they become short-tempered. How do you find the other signals that are telling you what's going on with your body
Mhm.
versus the time of day or somebody's diet that, is the expert that really doesn't know anything about you. You can't
Right.
have one diet. You've got this expert who tells you, oh, you have to do this diet and it's great for everybody.
Mm.
It's not possible.
Yes. Yeah, I like this conversation. My producer is telling me we've got to step away for just a moment, Lisa, to have a word from our sponsor. We'll just sneak away for just a couple of seconds. We'll be right back after these messages.
Sunday, October 24th, the 2021 Statler City Psychic Fair in Buffalo, New York. Come out and meet psychic medium and host of School Through Spirit, Diet Renee, and spirit medium and host of the Ghost Finders, Rob Thompson. Diet Renee is a renowned psychic medium, medical intuitive, and master teacher of psychic mediumship development. Hailing from Wisconsin, Diet trained under world-renowned psychic Lisa Williams. Spirit medium Rob Thompson is one of Diet's mediumship development students. He is the host and executive producer of America's longest-running indie paranormal TV show, The Ghost Finders, on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and Roku. He has made guest appearances on other shows, including Discovery Channel's Paranormal 911 and A Haunting, and teaches paranormal research at the Los Angeles City College. Come and meet these two superb mediums together on stage for live gallery readings. Remember, Sunday, October 24th, the 2021 Statler City Psychic Fair. Get your tickets now at StatlerCity.com. That's StatlerCity.com. Doors open at 1, close at 6. Gallery readings, tarot cards, and more. Statler City Psychic Fair. Tickets at StatlerCity.com.
Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTK-DB. Let's talk. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and we are connecting you to what's next. And we're here talking with Lisa Dahl. She is an intuitive eating coach. And right before the break, Lisa, we were just talking about how intuitive eating can help you learn what your body is telling you. And I know for myself, I have experienced times where I've been cooking and I've been like, well, you know what I'm really hungry for? It's this. And you teach clients to listen to those little prompts. And how receptive are people when they first meet you to uh, eating intuitively?
Everyone is really different. It's a challenging concept to accept when you have been so steeped into diet world, diet culture, and you have lost the ability to listen, trust, and respect your own intuition on what your body is saying.
Mhm.
And we start to lose that trust as infants, actually, because we're all born intuitive eaters. When you have a baby and the baby cries and the parent or caregiver or mom will offer the breast or the bottle, the baby will settle and suckle and close its lips as soon as they're done. And then the mom or the caregiver will say, well, I want to make sure that baby, my baby is well fed and not hungry. And all of a sudden we go back and we try to get that baby to have, one more suck of whatever, or another bite, or whatever stage they're at. And what we're actually doing is that we're teaching our babies, infants, and toddlers not to trust their own bodily instincts and intuition.
Right.
So through the practice of intuitive eating, I help my clients get back to understanding how our bodies are naturally present, to be able to listen to our body cues and think back to what it was like to just eat and be full with freedom and no judgment.
Right.
So it takes time. It's an education process. Some people are starting to become more familiar with the language. They don't necessarily know what it means. It kind of catches their attention and that sounds kind of interesting. Some people are so tired of dieting that they're just so willing to do something different. And intuitive eating is doing something different, not working harder at the same diet that doesn't work, or another diet plan that doesn't work. The science shows that diets don't work, that they're not sustainable. So it is a re-education process of dismantling all the information that you have told to be true that is no longer true, or not true to begin with. So it takes time for people to really start to be comfortable with it. One of the most wonderful things about the practice of intuitive eating is that, unlike a diet, you can't fail it. It is a practice.
Right.
Every eating opportunity is another opportunity to practice. It's not good or bad. It is your experience, and what can you learn from it.
Right. So when people begin, like when you start working with clients, and really educating them on food and helping them understand how they've been using food, what do you find is a common resistance as people think about preparing their own food? Like, oh no.
The biggest resistance is they're so afraid to trust themselves. If I give myself permission to eat this, I'm never going to stop.
That makes sense.
And, so many people have, I will only bake cookies once in a blue moon, because if I bake one, if I bake this, I'm going to eat the whole thing.
Right.
The truth is that if you baked that thing every day and gave yourself permission to eat it every day, with time, you would not eat all of it. So there's something called the practice of habituation. So a simple example is, if you, let's just take M&Ms. You have permission to eat that 1 pound bag of M&Ms every day. That first day, and when we're talking about doing this, we're talking about doing it mindfully, not in the middle of a binge, not when you're starving. We're talking sitting down when you're hungry but not stuffed. It's quiet. You can pay attention. You're having an experience with those M&Ms. And that first day, you might just be loving every last one of them, and you can eat through that pound. Maybe day 2, maybe day 3, maybe even day 4. Chances are, as you continue with that, you're going to start to look at those M&Ms and think, I can't eat a pound of M&Ms. They start to taste, super sweet, or you get that dry mouth feeling, whatever your experience is. All of a sudden, those M&Ms, like after you hit that half pound mark, they're not so pleasant. And you start to realize that you have 1 M&M, no big deal. You have 10 M&Ms, no big deal. A handful of M&Ms, no big deal. You get into the half pound, all of a sudden you don't feel so good and you don't want them anymore. When you give yourself unconditional permission, without the voices, without the judgment, without the chatter, you're tasting it, you're noticing its texture. All of a sudden, you don't need a pound of M&Ms, because you have permission to have more tomorrow, so you don't need to stuff them all down tonight. And it changes your relationship with food. So it's learning that you can trust yourself with time, patience, practice, and self-compassion.
Yes. Now, do you find that some people kind of get stuck there, though? Like if you told me you can eat as much mashed potatoes and gravy as you want,
It's
I don't I don't think I would ever get tired of it.
it is it takes time to develop that trust through the process. We don't move into habituation on day one. We really work through some other things, really noticing the diet culture, noticing where those thoughts have come from, starting to understand, the diet mentality, how to honor your hunger so that you can start to notice your hunger. Because as dieters, many people don't notice their hunger.
Mhm.
What often happens is through a practice called interceptive awareness is if you feel your bladder, like you feel your distended bladder, you know that you have to pee, and you are not going to really play around with that sensation. You're going to
No.
make sure that you find a place, or where there's a place that you can relieve yourself on any given time.
Mhm.
When you're a dieter and you feel hunger, you ignore it and you push it away, and you're like, I'll deal with that later. I don't have time. If I start to eat, it's going to be all day. I'm trying to be good. You go through that whole litany.
Right.
And then what happens is that at the end of the day, you probably haven't eaten very much, and now you're starving. And now you think that you have no control over your intake of how much you want to eat, which is partially true because you have starved your body. And when you start to
Right.
give your body food, your body's saying, well, I'm not going to trust you. You've given me some food, and I'm going to make sure that I eat as much as I need because I don't know when you're going to feed me again. Our
Right.
bodies don't know the difference between a chosen famine and a real famine. So we constantly are fighting with our bodies when we restrict and deprive.
And you know what, Lisa, that makes perfect sense to me. That makes perfect sense. As people start and begin uh, uh, one-on-one coaching or group coaching with you, and start preparing their own meals, are they sometimes shocked? Are they sometimes like when we started culinary school and started making stock, we were absolutely shocked at how much salt changes everything. Do you find people shocked at in meal prep themselves?
I think that they become surprised that with the right tools, that meal prep can be a little bit easier. It's, especially as you being a chef, if you don't have a sharp knife and you're
Right.
trying to prep food, it's torture. Like,
It is.
it's no wonder people don't like to chop food.
That remind people will always say, "Hey, Kevin, come show us your chefy skills," and they'll hand me the dullest knife I have ever used.
Right. And you can't do anything with it. Like
No,
you can't. It's the wrong, it all of a sudden becomes the wrong tool.
right,
Learning to have, how do we prepare your kitchen? Like starting with just the
right.
simple things and the tools that you need. And I'm not a big gadget person, make sure that you have a chopping board, make sure that you have some sharp knives, make sure you have a few bowls, some simple things that will make the prep easier and have things to store the food in so that you can stick it in your freezer or stick it in your refrigerator. And once we start to understand where the resistance is coming from, it makes the next step easier. And people have all different types of resistance. Some people will be like, well, I don't even know how to boil water. Have you ever been taught? Have you ever even tried?
Mhm.
And it goes into the fear factor. Somebody says, well, you don't know how to cook. All of a sudden, that's the thought that they have, that they could never learn how to cook.
Right.
So it's really trying to help clients understand where is their challenge, where do they feel it in their body when we talk about meal planning. Is it about the planning? Is it about the prepping? Is it about provisioning, getting the ingredients in? Is it about protecting your time? What is it that causes that angst, and how do we remove those barriers so that you can get tasty and delicious food on your table? And
Mhm.
again, meal planning, it could be if you just want to do takeout 5 days a week, that's fine. Let's plan for it so that you're not, if McDonald's isn't serving you any longer, and maybe once a week it does because it fits what you want to eat. But how do we plan for the other meals where you want something that's more satisfying? Because satisfaction is the key component to the practice of intuitive eating. When we're not satisfied, we keep going back for other things.
Right.
And you just consume like, bits of this and bits of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And if you just went for what you really wanted and were satisfied, it changes your relationship with food. And satisfaction doesn't always just come from the food itself. Who are you
Right.
having your meal with? What is your state of mind? What is your environment? What is your stress level? All of those things come into the satisfaction you have with a meal. You can have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich walking out the door and it fills the need. Maybe you're going on a picnic on a first date with somebody who you're so excited, and all of a sudden you're in this beautiful meadow and you have a picnic basket and you have a bottle of wine, and all you had was peanut butter and jelly, but all of a sudden that peanut butter and jelly is the most magical piece of food that you've ever had.
Mhm.
So how do you discover the satisfaction in whatever it is that you're eating?
Mhm. Exactly. Now, is part of the intuitive and being mindful in the program is that also paying attention to how the food is affecting you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's many people will say, if I eat this, I feel that. The question is it a thought? Is it a body cue? What is the difference? So I
Mhm.
work with my clients to understand there's three components to that question: a thought, a body cue, and an act of self-care.
Mhm.
How does how does that food really make you feel? Does it nourish you? Does it fill your sweet tooth? Does it give you energy? What metrics do you want to use on how food makes you feel?
Mhm.
And we will talk about that. We don't ever talk about the number on the scale. We don't talk about weighing and measuring food. We don't weigh or measure our bodies. That is one metrics that is entirely off of the table. And
Mhm.
nutrition actually comes last with the practice of intuitive eating, because when we add nutrition into it, if you're part of that diet world, all of a sudden you start thinking, well, how many calories, how much protein, how many grams of fat? We want to focus on how that food makes you feel
Mhm.
before we talk about gentle nutrition and getting into the nitty gritty of what that looks like.
Mhm. And as you're working with people, are they also doing movement or exercise as well in the program?
So that's a great question. And I refer to it as the practice is movement. And it's movement that makes you feel good, not
Mhm.
exercise that's based on shrinking your body. So, one of the best examples that I can give is of myself. And prior to me really learning about the practice and using the practice of intuitive eating, I would be the militant exerciser. So, if my day started at 6 in the morning, like if work started at 6 in the morning, I would be up at 4 in the morning to make sure that I got my run in or my workout in. Or if I was meeting a friend to walk, I would still make sure that I got my protocol in of what was expected, what I had said I was expected to do that day.
Mhm.
Now, fast forward, it's movement that makes me feel good, and it's not focused on burning calories or shrinking my body. So I spend a ton of time out in nature and hiking. Um, I no longer run long distances because it hurts my hips.
Mhm.
Where 3 or 4 years ago, like I didn't really care if it hurt my hips. I was going to go run because that's what I needed to do, and there was no negotiation.
Mhm.
And now we have a 10-month-old puppy. I wanna go take her out, and we go hiking, and she's running in the woods, and I'm spending time with my partner. Movement that brings me joy is
Mhm.
really the focus, and I'm not I still start my day with movement, typically 7 days a week, because it makes me feel good, but it doesn't always have to be at 5 AM. Sometimes it's like, okay, he's my partner's free at 3 in the afternoon on a Friday. We'll go do that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I will not work out at 5 in the morning to get that double component in. So it's really about helping my clients learn what movement makes them feel good. I have
Mhm.
one client who now refers it to as her agility because she hates
Oh.
the word exercise. She doesn't like the word movement. And she's like, "I wanna be more agile. So what am
Yes.
I gonna do to make myself more agile?"
Mhm.
And that's that's the thought process that's working for her. Whether it is yoga, whether it is Zumba, whether it's a walk in the park, it doesn't matter as long as it's movement that makes you feel good and that it brings you joy. And that when you like something, you're going to go back and do it again, and it's not going to be a chore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love this conversation. It reminds me of a conversation we had earlier in the New Bridge radio show with Kate Mariah. And she ended up bedridden for 2 years. She couldn't move. She had a rare form of Lyme disease, Lisa, and it left her almost completely paralyzed. And she just said one day she started just listening to her intuition and listening to what her body was telling her, and she would make whatever little tiny change she needed to make that day in order to feel better. And which kind of, I like what you just said about the agility, because that is kind of what she is doing. So you're kind of taking people and you're saying, hey, your intuition is a really good teacher, trainer, caretaker, if you can just tap into it. So when you begin this journey of intuitive eating, what is it you tell people about intuition and about trusting their intuition?
It's helping them learn to listen to their cues. And it really starts with listening and awareness. And, my clients always say that, because we'll start off with, tell me what you noticed this week, what's happening. And they always laugh. Well, I feel like a broken record, but the word that keeps coming up is awareness. And it's not a broken record, because that is the practice, is to be self-aware. And when you become aware, all of a sudden you realize, like, you've been walking through life and you're just like checked out, not even noticing what's happening within your own space.
Right.
It takes time to get to know your body, and that you have permission to get to know your body. And when you do it with kindness and compassion and not judgment, it changes your relationship with your body. And when you can begin to listen, the next step is to beginning to trust it.
Right.
And when our bodies, our vessels, whatever they look like, whatever it is, this is it. It's how do you make peace with where you are? Because this is what you have for however long we are here. And when you take care of yourself, when you begin to respect your body, and I don't tell my clients that, you're going to come out and love every inch of your body. How do we just accept body neutrality and to take care of it and to make our bodies be the best that they can be? Because everybody's body is different and has challenges. And, the story you just shared about that, that woman who was bedridden, she worked really hard to make her body the best that it could be with what was in front of her. That's all that we're talking about. Everybody's idea of health is very different, and ability to achieve health is very different. And our health changes in a split second.
It sure does.
Yeah. I mean, we could walk out the door and, well, she was just here and now she's gone. I mean, you don't know. All we're talking about is learning to be able to understand. I call it body speak. What is your body trying to say? How do we learn the language that our body is communicating to us?
Do you feel that there's somewhat of a spiritual connection as well?
I think for some people there are. Everybody's experience is very different. I don't have a black or white answer for that, because I
That's
think
okay.
I think that everyone has different connections with themselves and different spirituality, and spirituality means different things to different people. So I think for some people, absolutely. For others, they'd be kind of looking at me like, huh? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So it is, intuitive eating is not necessarily for people, only people who are very spiritual.
Right.
And and it's learning, it's helping people understand that they can learn to be intuitive with themselves,
Right.
and that they have to get rid of, they have to work towards removing that barrier that somebody says, like, you can't,
Mhm.
or the diet that tells you this is the way to do it. It's really letting go of that binary thinking of black and white, or good, bad, right, or wrong, and learning to shift away to the gray.
Mhm. So let me ask you this. So, since you've been doing this and you've been helping all these people, what has been your triumphs in switching your career and connecting to this? What has been one of your most proudest moments since you've been doing this?
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful that I do what I do, because it aligns with me just in every sense of my being.
Hmm.
And the best thing is that when I work with my clients and they start to share how they are feeling in their bodies, and that they're just kinder to themselves and their self-talk is shifting. Somebody will say, I put on a bathing suit and I walked out to the pool. And these are women who never will put on a bathing suit prior to working with me, because they're so steeped in the fact that, this is the way that people see them. So I work
Right.
really hard with helping people understand it is about how they feel in their body and not how people see them. That
Right.
it's there's a difference between body image and embodiment, and we try to step away from that body being an object and focusing more on how you feel in your body. So it's a whole shift on how you think and how you feel. And it's just I get such joy and pleasure when I talk to my clients on how they feel about themselves and the difference that I'm able to help them make in their lives. It really is extraordinarily satisfying.
Hmm. Yes, I can kind of relate in ways, in working with and doing Reiki on people and having them come back and, you know, before they were terrible and they were in terrible shape, and now all of a sudden they're just, there's life back in them and they're beaming, and that is the best feeling, is feeling that kind that you've made that kind of contribution, and that this person has changed because of you. So let me ask you this, Lisa, because this is a question I thought of when I was looking at your website. When there are a lot of, like you say, a lot of people out there who have struggled and who have done dieting and they're in this regimen, and how what kind of person would need to come see you? um what's probably going on in their head?
This person is tired of dieting, they're feeling defeated, they think that they are an emotional eater. They are tired, the thought of one more diet is just, hanging on their head. They're afraid of failure. They're afraid of the judgment of people, are like, "Oh, you're trying it again," or just that love-hate relationship with food. They're afraid, they eat differently when they're by themselves versus when they're out in public. They have lots of rules and regulations, and they're tired and exhausted. And they really want to start feeling better. Like they've spent so many years and time and money having this, fixing themselves. It's really shifting to saying it's time to heal. And how can we make those things, how can we work through those issues? It's not about the food.
Right.
It's not about what you're going to eat. It's what's happening in your mind about the food and the stories about the food, and letting go of ready to let go of those rules and the restrictions and the deprivations. And it's, willing to take a chance to try something different. And as I said, not working harder, ready to offer themselves self-compassion, really moving
Mhm.
from, that self-criticism of the diet world and the diet culture, and
Right.
moving into self-care and self-compassion. So it's a very, I coach very differently than your typical health and wellness coach. There are no before and after pictures.
Right.
None
Right. That's helpful.
None,
Right.
because I hate to say it, is that before picture and then that after picture, there's another after picture which looks just like your before picture.
Right.
That's the reality of it.
Right. Before, after, before, after, before. Right. That's bad. Now, do you find that a lot, there's a lot like there's a lot of like my siblings and myself, we're all, getting older, and a lot is changing. Like we've a lot of people in my family are resistant to weight, like, or were, and then all of a sudden what's happening, what's taking place? Do you have a lot of people that are in that situation where they've never gained weight or had issues, now all of a sudden what is going on?
Most of us are in that position, especially after the last couple of years. I mean, age, our bodies change.
Hmm.
When we have, when you see young children and they're going through adolescence, and people are commenting on their bodies, on how exciting it is that they're growing and they're maturing and they're this and they're that. And my target market, who I typically work with, are women who are 40 plus. And in this, people, like, women are embarrassed that our bodies are changing. Life, I mean, that happens. Everybody's body changes. And when we
Hmm.
start to accept that, and again, it is, getting rid of that judgment. But even if, you know, let's just say that you ate exactly the way that you had the last 18 months through COVID, but your movement shifted. Like, you weren't
Hmm.
leaving your house. You weren't doing errands. You weren't running down the street to go visit a neighbor. Your body is going to change
Right.
just from the shift in how you move every day. There's so few people whose bodies have not changed during
It's-
this time period.
right.
And how do we show up without guilt and shame? Because
Right.
the guilt and shame comes from everybody's judgment.
Hmm.
How do we
Hmm.
learn to not comment on people's bodies? Because when we comment on people's bodies, we don't know if we're commenting or supporting somebody's eating disorder or disordered eating, or if they have an illness or they're going through grief, or we don't know what's happening.
Right.
How do we change that conversation to people who we haven't, to we see is, I'm just so happy to see you.
Right.
Not
You
about,
look
oh,
fabulous.
you look great. Did you lose weight?
Right.
Well, you know, or the silence because somebody has added a few pounds. How do we stop talking about people's bodies, and how do we set those boundaries? Look at somebody's eyes. Oh, your eyes are sparkling. What's happening? You look happy. Or
Exactly.
there seems to be a sadness. Tell me, how are you? Like,
Hmm.
instead of just that verbal automatic of, hey, you look great, you must have lost weight, or how do we helping people change that conversation?
That's a really good point, because that makes all the difference. When somebody says something like that, it can make your entire day,
Good or bad?
good or bad. I had a woman who uh, um, did that at the store a month ago. And, I was just buying carrots and celery and stock, and she looked and just said, "Oh, you look like you really know how to cook." I'm like, "I do."
And it's funny is that, prior to being an intuitive eating health coach, and it was, I'd go through the market, and I would take pride in the fact that, there was no processed foods in my bag, and people would comment. And now, and I'm like, oh, you know what? We're going to throw this in, we're going to throw this in, because it's not good. Food is neutral.
Mhm.
It's only us, food has no moral value. It's only our thoughts that change that. And when we just kind of say, like, I'm eating this without the story behind it, it shifts our relationship with food.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And um, I I I feel like I'm a little bit more open about this now. Like I feel like this is the right answer. Like maybe is there someone out there sitting there like, you know what, this is where I need to go with my food. Or this is the direction I know that I need to go in order to make this work finally. Because just having a lot of friends, I know, and a female dominated family, I know that there is this pattern of guilt that happens when people are struggling with food.
Yes. So and the guilt is in correlation with the restriction and the deprivation. So what
Hmm.
happens is that think about it as a seesaw. So that when you're restricting and you're depriving, you have less guilt.
Hmm.
So, and then as your guilt decreases, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a little bit of freedom, there's a little bit of wiggle room. I'm going to start to eat. And all of a sudden you
Hmm.
start to refeed. And then because your body is saying, well, you haven't fed me in so long, I'm going to go all the way to the other side. And then the dam breaks, but the guilt and the shame are back.
Right.
The practice of intuitive eating removes the guilt and the shame, the restriction and the deprivation. So instead of being on that traditional roller coaster, I kind of say, like, let's move to the kiddie park, and you can just have the natural ups and downs of the gentle ride. Let's get rid
Right.
of the loop-de-loops.
The bunny slope. Well, Lisa, this hour went by so amazingly fast. In the time we have left, before the show, I was telling you how beautiful your website is. Tell people how to find your website.
You can find me at Lisa Dahl, Dahl, wellness.com. So it's Lisa Dahl, wellness.com. You can also find me on Facebook under Lisa Dahl Wellness, as well as on Instagram. Those are the
Yes.
best places to find me.
And mention who it is that designed your beautiful website.
Oh, I'm always happy to share who designed my website and does all of my graphics. So there's a little nepotism in here. So my daughter, Samantha Dahl, does all of my graphic design work. And that's what she's done. She has her own business called Dahl House Design. She has not even found the time to create her own website because she's just been so busy from word of mouth. So if you would like to reach out to her, you can, best way is to reach out to me and I can connect you. So Sammy Dahl, you can find her on Facebook, but doesn't have her, just everything is word of mouth with that child. Well, child,
Absolutely.
grown woman, I should say. But she does all graphic design as well as website design, and she's just fantastic.
She really is amazing because your website is beautiful. It is beautifully designed, and I think she did a really great job. So check out Lisa Dahl's website because it is absolutely stunning, and it is a great design. Well, that's about all the time we have for this edition of the New Bridge Radio Show. I want to thank you again for being our guest, Lisa, and for being a part of our show. We will be back next week on the New Bridge Radio Show, connecting you to what's next again. And our guest next week is going to be Dr. Mark Merryweather, who is a professional forager and someone that is instructing people on how to forage in the forest. And he takes groups around Texas to show them how to forage professionally. And you won't want to miss that edition of the New Bridge Radio Show. And that's going to wrap it up for us. And we will see you again live next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the New Bridge Radio Show. Stay tuned now for Haunted Voices with Todd Bates.
Thank you so much.